remember once when I was a student in Rome, I had the privilege of having not only really good professors, but also a number of really good students who were among us, and they were a great example. I remember one of them. I remember seeing him in the chapel many a time. He was from the North American College, what we would call the NAC. And I remember I found out once that he also gave tours of St. Peter's. And when I found out that he gave tours of St. Peter's, I made an effort, which is something I wouldn't normally do. I was not like John Paul II. John Paul II says that when he was in Rome, he systematically visited all of Rome. When I was in Rome, I systematically visited none of Rome. I was like the opposite of John Paul II. John Paul II was a genius, and I was one of those students who had to really study to pass his tests. So I didn't do like John Paul II, but in this occasion, I did go to St. Peter's and listen to the tour of this fellow seminarian of mine. It was well worth it. It was excellent. I remember as soon as he started talking, I started to take notes. And basing myself on his notes, I gave the same tour to a number of times while I was in Rome. So when people would come to visit, I had the privilege of explaining to them the same things that this seminarian had told me. I thought it was class. So it's thanks to him that I celebrate this feast. Today, we're on the feast day of the dedication of St. Peter and St. Paul. And it's actually just una memoria libre. It's just a day of, it's not an obligatory memorial, it's just a memorial. In other words, it's one of those feasts that you don't even have to celebrate. I do celebrate it. I think the reason I celebrate it so much is because I love, there's a phrase from the Psalms, it says, tus siervos aman sus piedras. Your servants love their stones. And I have to say, in the case of St. Peter's and St. Paul, I like both. I have to say, I love my stones. Like I love St. I remember when we were walking in, he was saying, "Do you see this wall?" It was the wall of St. Peter's. 2 Mack trucks can fit side by side here. 2 trucks, like the big trucks. In other words, it's as wide as a typical Irish road. Like those roads that like only fit 2. That's how wide St. Peter's is. The wall, stone. It's a beast. And there was other details that I still find fascinating, and I still find myself using those details on a regular basis. One of them is the fact that if you look at the colonnade, which is that area of columns which is right in front of St. Peter's, there's 2 points on either side where if you stand there, the 4 sets of columns, one behind the other, you stand precisely in that spot, and the 4 columns line up. So all you see is one column for every 4 columns or 3 columns that are behind it. The reason for it is because God, the author Bernini, wanted us to know that God created the world. It's a symbol of creation with number, measure, and weight. In other words, he wanted to make the world with precision. There's another detail about the colonnade that I think, well, there's several details that I think are fascinating. One is that, the precision of it. Another one is that it's supposed to be the arms of the Mother Church. It's true that today is not the feast day of the official church of the Pope. The official church of the Pope is St. John Lateran's. But St. Peter's Basilica is the Mother Church because most people think it's like the most important church. And it's really cool. It's the biggest church in the world. But those columns, they also represent the Mother Church. In other words, the church is our mother, and those columns are supposed to be an embrace of our mother. In other words, anyone can walk into that embrace. But notice the fact that it's not a wall. It's actually a column, And the idea is that you can enter and leave the embrace of your mother at any time. In other words, it's different from the Muslims. The Muslims in Pakistan, for instance, they have the kafirs, the emirs, and the murtids. In other words, three groups of people. In other words, if you're a murtids, well, if you're a kafir, if you're a non-Muslim, you have to be fought against. If you're the emirs, you're a Muslim, you're a non-Muslim inside Muslim territory, you have to do menial labor. In other words, you have to do like clean the bathrooms. That's your job because you're a non-Muslim in Muslim territory. So you fight against the Muslims who are the non-Muslims who are outside your territory. You submit those who are non-Muslims within your territory. But here's the worst part, the murtids. The murtids are those if you leave the Muslim faith, you have to be killed within 3 days. And if you are killed ahead of that, it's actually not a crime. Which is really scary when you compare it with the freedom of those who leave and enter the church. And another symbol for the colonnade is the fact that if you remember, which is what you're supposed to do when you go there, if you remember that that's where St. Peter was crucified upside down. It was the circus of Caligula, who was a mad emperor. He was actually a very scary person, a megalomaniac. He would actually pay people to race against him so he could beat them. It's kind of scary. And in that same colonnade, Bernini, the author of the colonnade, he also wanted to put on the top the saints who have preceded us. In other words, it's meant to be also a reminder that those saints who have gone before us, they're watching our race. They're watching us as we fight for heaven. They're cheering for us like we will be cheering in a couple days. We're looking forward to a number of, especially one game that's coming up this next Wednesday. So please keep it in the prayers. And the saints are cheering for us the same way that other saints cheered for them. And lastly, the colonnade also from the top, it looks like a keyhole. In other words, it's the basilica of the Pope who has the keys. But I love that. I think my favorite detail is the one of the mother. I love the idea of having a mother's arms and that you can leave or enter the embrace from any direction. I think it's such a beautiful symbol of Christianity. Okay, I've given you one detail. Do you guys want another one? Javi, do you want another one? Yeah. Okay, Javi wants another detail, so we're going to give another cool detail about St. Peter's. Look, another one, there's actually a lot that I love a lot. Look, as soon as you enter St. Peter's and you look up, there's actually the head of 30 popes that are looking down at you. Like these big, not like these, like they're not like their actual heads. They're just these mosaics of these popes. And they're looking down at you, and they're the 30 popes who died martyrs. It's a way of reminding you that we're entering St. Peter's Basilica, that the only way to enter heaven, because it's meant to be a beautiful basilica, and it is, the only way to enter heaven directly is by martyrdom or the attitude of a martyr. You only get to heaven if you give an all or nothing. The only way to make it to heaven is with that same attitude of the saints who spilled their blood for the church. I'm going to add one more detail that I think is just fascinating. There's a ton. There's actually so many really beautiful ones. But I wanted to add just one more, which I think is worth keeping in one's heart. When you enter the basilica, if you enter on the left, you'll notice as you're going down, and if you look up as you're walking on, you'll see that the bóveda. How do you say bóveda in Spanish? But how do you say it in English? The bóveda? It's not coming to me right now. This is what happens when you spend all your life speaking in Spanish. You start to forget your English. But that's what the dome. The dome. As you look up, the dome is circular. But there comes a moment when you look up and the dome is no longer circular, it's spherical. In other words, it's no longer a perfect Greek circle. It's actually oblong. It's an ellipse. This is fascinating. The church, when they were making the basilica, was actually made from the outside, from the inside out. And while they were making it, there came a point when Kepler, a Protestant astronomer, discovered that the orbit of the planets were not perfect circles. They were ellipses. And the Pope at the time said, we're not better than God. We're not going to do something better than God. We're going to imitate God. If God didn't make perfect circles, if God made ellipses, we're going to do ellipses. For me, I think it's so beautiful to remember that science and faith never contradict. Never. And if we discover something of science, as was the case of the ellipses of the movement of the planets, that they weren't perfect circles as the Greeks thought, then we are the ones who have to imitate God. It's such an important point. Often when you're dealing with students or teachers, it's many a time people think that there's a contradiction, that if 7-day creation or Big Bang, they're contradictory. They don't. And I always like chuckle at that. I always think of how Georges Lemaitre, he's actually a Belgian priest, so it's a very important argument against that. And the other one that people always think about is like they think that it's not coming to me. It will come to me. Galileo. His name was not coming to me. Anyway, Galileo, he wasn't burned. He wasn't burned. And another detail about Galileo is that his daughter, after he was condemned, his condemnation just consists in that he couldn't teach what was a hypothesis of the time as a fact, because his basis for it was the tides. That's not a good basis for how that the Earth goes around the sun. That's not the reason for the tides. But he was right, and the church recognizes it now. And I think it's interesting that he wasn't against the church either. That they gave him as penance. He was under house arrest. He wasn't even put in jail. He was under house arrest. In other words, he would have to sleep at his house. That was his obligation. And he had to pray the 7 penitential psalms, which he continued to do after the 3-year period for the rest of his life, because he actually started to love them. So he continued to pray them. Another detail about Galileo, which I think is fascinating, above the fact that he wasn't burned, is his daughter actually entered as a nun. I think that's like shows a lot. Like he wasn't against the church in any way. So we're going to continue with this Mass, and I hope these little details, these like 4 senses of the colonnade, and this detail about the ellipses of the domes, I hope it helps to recognize the beauty of our faith, the beauty of the stones of these men and all the work that they put into it, and that help us to love not only the stones, which is a good thing. It's good to love these works of art, these acts of faith of so many popes and so many holy people, that we love not only them, but we love above all heaven. That these details of stones help us to fall in love with heaven and in love with our faith. Amen.